Good morning. Thank you for coming to Sunday school class this morning. I'd like to say I'm so thankful for the Lord. I think of the 53rd anniversary that He's given my wife and I, and we certainly praise Him for that. It's a good life. We've enjoyed mostly living together. We probably don't always see eye, that's for sure, but hopefully we complement one another. And I guess that's what God intended, isn't it? He made us male and female, and so we have different perspectives and different thoughts, but the Lord helps us to mold together and be a unit, and I thank God for that. Brother Dale Franklin, would you pray for our class, please?
Dear Jesus, thank you that we can gather in your house this morning again and worship you, and ask your help in the Sunday school lesson, ask your help, Brother Giles, ask your help in the main service this morning. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, Larry, how many years is it for you and Carolyn?
What are you trying to put me on the spot?
Yeah.
64.
All right. That's wonderful.
And I'm so happy she got me.
Yes.
How about her?
Good. Anybody else have any comments?
Well, she deserves a steak dinner for taking him.
Okay. You heard that, Larry. Well, we've spent a couple days away, and we thought we'd go to a really nice, fancy place, and we couldn't find one where we were at. We were up at Geneva on the lake, and it's really casual there. But we had a good time. We got some really great ice cream. If you ever want to go up to Geneva on the lake, stop at Whip and Dip. Maybe I shouldn't be making an advertisement, but they had something called Lake Erie Salt Mine, and it was just fantastic. It's probably the best ice cream we've ever had. It's an hour and a half away, so we probably won't go get it very often. Well, that's enough comments. Let's look at our lesson. It's on Esther this morning, a self-sacrificing queen. When we consider Esther, we see a truly self-sacrificing person. She was willing to put her life on the line for the sake of her countrymen. And this points out the fact that the course of history can often be changed by one committed, godly person. I remember reading of how God used Rees Howells as an intercessor for Allied victory in the Second World War. Mr. Howells tells of how God began to lay the burden for international affairs on him 4 years before the war was declared. He realized that Hitler was Satan's agent for preventing the gospel to go to every creature. Mr. Howells believed that God would have to destroy Hitler if the vision of the gospel was to be fulfilled. He and those who covenanted with him committed to give their lives to fight the battles for the kingdom, as really as if called to fight on the Western Front. Well, God intervened at Dunkirk in answer to their prayers by giving a calm sea over which the Allied troops were able to withdraw to safety. When the Nazis were marching toward Moscow, God asked Brother Howells, "Is there any need for Moscow to fall? Why don't you pray and believe for me to save Moscow and give a setback to the Nazis?" They did pray, and Moscow never fell. In fact, the record shows that 3 million of the prime soldiers of the Nazi army perished in the snow that winter. The Germans could have taken Moscow almost without a struggle, but they turned back. Why? No one knows but the Germans themselves. But God had answered prayer. Brother Howells was also led to pray for Palestine and Alexandria, Egypt. On a Saturday afternoon, the college was called to spend the afternoon in prayer for God to save Alexandria and turn the tide in North Africa. The following week, the news reported that previous Saturday, the tide had turned at Armenia, and Alexandria was saved. The Major P.W. Rayner, who was responsible for supplying the 8th Army with water, tells this story. Between Rommel's men and Alexandria were the remnants of the British Army, 50 tanks, a few score field guns, and 5,000 soldiers. The Germans held the advantage because of their superior 88 millimeter guns. Both armies were near exhaustion from heat, dust, and lack of water. In the words of Major Rainier, the sun was almost overhead, and our men were fast reaching the end of their endurance when the Nazis broke. An incredible thing happened. 1,100 men of the 90th Light Panzer Division, the elite of the Afrika Korps, came stumbling across the barren sand with their hands in the air. Cracked and black with coagulated blood, their swollen tongues were protruding from their mouths. Crazily, they tore the water bottles from the necks of the other men and poured living, life-giving swallows of water between their lips. Major Rainier goes on to give the reason for the Nazi surrender. The Germans had been 24 hours without water when they overran the British defenses and found a 6-inch water pipe. They shot holes in it and drank deeply of what the water came out. Only after they drank deeply did they realize the pipe was actually full of salt water. The pipe had just been laid, and Major Rainier had begun to test it with the seawater. The day before, it would have been empty. 2 days later, it would have been full of fresh water. The hand of Almighty God was in evidence once more, coming to the aid of the Allies. Yes, God uses individuals to change the course of history. Esther was only a Jewish handmaiden who had lost her parents and was an exile in a foreign land. But God used her to save the Jewish people from annihilation. Esther's story takes place in Shushan, the capital city of the Persian Empire. King Ahasuerus is listed in the scriptures, is believed to be Darius' son Xerxes, had removed Queen Vashti because she failed to do his bidding, and we all know that story. The search was made to find beautiful young virgins from which the king would choose a new queen. Esther's cousin Mordecai heard this announcement. He had become Esther's guardian after her father and her mother died. Esther was one of the young women who were chosen and taken to the palace under the care of Haggai, the custodian of women. Esther pleased him and was given special treatment. When her turn came to go into the king, he loved her more than all the other women. She obtained grace and favor in the king's sight, more than all the virgins. And so he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen of the realm. In the meantime, an enemy of the Jews by the name of Haman was promoted to leadership in the kingdom. Mordecai refused to bow before Haman, which angered Haman. Haman came up with a plan to not only destroy Mordecai, but all the other Jews in the kingdom as well. He brought his evil plan before the king, and the king approved his plans. When Mordecai heard of Haman's plans, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. Esther heard Mordecai's actions and sent garments for him to wear, but he would not accept them and change his garments. She then instructed Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs, to go to Mordecai and learn what was the reason for his actions. Her isolation in the palace had apparently kept her from hearing the edict that had been made to destroy the Jews. And this is where we pick up our printed portion of our lesson. Chapter 4, verses 7 through 14. Are there any comments anyone wants to make before we read the printed portion? Well, I'll read the light verses and you read the dark. And Mordecai told him of, that would be Hatak, told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them.
Also, he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in to the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make the request before him for her people.
And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai.
Esther spake unto Hatak, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai.
All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days.
And they told to Mordecai Esther's words.
Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews.
Thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this?
Well, as we see here, Mordecai was sitting in the city square in front of the king's gate when Hatak approached him. Hatak questioned Mordecai and found out the reason for his mourning. He explained that at Haman's suggestion, the king had sent an edict to all the provinces of the kingdom to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month. It didn't matter if they were young or old, if they were little children or women. All the Jews were to be killed. And those who attacked the Jews were also given the privilege to plunder their possessions. They could take anything they wanted. Haman had even promised to pay money into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. Mordecai even gave Hatak a copy of the written decree so he could show it to Esther, so that she could see for herself what was planned. He then instructed Hatak to command Esther to go to the king and plead for her people. When Hatak returned to the palace, he went to Esther and told her all that Mordecai had instructed him to tell her. Esther sent Hatak back to Mordecai to inform him of the impossibility of her doing his bidding. She reminded Mordecai that unless the king summons a person into his presence, they were taking their life into their own hands, because the law stated that whoever entered the inner court of the king, unless they had been called, will be put to death unless the king holds out the golden scepter to them. Esther then informed Mordecai that she had not been called to go into the king in the last 30 days. She would be placing her life in jeopardy if she attempted to follow Mordecai's command. When Hatak returned to Mordecai and told him what Esther said, Mordecai had a sobering message for her. He first warned Esther that she would not be spared just because she was the queen. She would suffer along with the rest of the Jews. Mordecai also was confident that God would provide deliverance for his children, whether or not she would be the one willing to intercede for her people. However, he warned her that if she remained quiet, she and her father's house would perish. And then Mordecai clinched his argument with the suggestion that this could be the sole reason that she had been made king. It's not stated here, but this suggests that God had a hand in the circumstances that placed her in the palace as the queen. It is important for us to note that God will keep his covenant promises with Abraham's descendants. And Mordecai's confidence of this divine protection is seen in his assurance to Esther that the Jews would not be destroyed. God had his hand upon the Jews, and they were under his protection. Are there any comments?
I need some explanation, excuse me, explanation here for my own personal satisfaction. Mordecai said that the Jews would be delivered from another source if she didn't do this. But yet, she and her father's house would be destroyed. I don't understand that.
To me, it seems like he was making a prediction. He felt that he knew that God would deliver them, but if she failed to be willing to be that intermediary, that he felt that she and her family would be destroyed because she was the sole person left in her family. And so if she would lose her life, her family would be destroyed. That's the way I take that. But as again, it's so important, I think, to realize that Mordecai recognized that God was going to deliver them. But he felt that Esther was the one that should be used of God to bring about that deliverance.
That was really putting pressure on her. She would be
Yes, it was.
in a hard place then.
It sure was. And that's why she was quaking in her royal sandals, you might say. She wasn't too excited about the thought of going into the king, was she? Any other thoughts? Well, I'd like to consider Esther's response to Mordecai, even though it's not in the printed portion of our lesson. They jump from one section to another. But Esther agreed to do as her cousin asked her. But first, she wanted all the Jews in Shushan to band together and fast for 3 days. I believe that she recognized the critical need for God to intervene on their behalf. She needed some support, didn't she? And she wanted others to band together with her. It's not stated that they came for prayer, but it says for fasting, and I would believe and assume that included praying to Almighty God. Well, after 3 days, she promised that she would go to the king, even though she might be put to death. She was going to place her life on the line on behalf of her people. And so she declared, if I perish, I perish. She was fully committed to doing what Mordecai had asked her to do. Well, let's look at the next portion. We jump over to chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Jim, would you read those, please?
Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him.
All right, thank you. You will notice this was the third day after that Esther went before the king. This was following their 3 days fast. She didn't procrastinate and wait for a perfect opportunity. You know how it's when you have something you're facing that's difficult. Maybe you don't do that, but I tend to want to put it off. It's hard to face some things sometimes, and you just sort of like to withdraw. But she didn't do that. She just proceeded. She and all the Jews had done their fasting and praying, and now it was time to act. We're also told that Esther put on her royal robes. These robes identified her as the queen. But would this be enough to gain the favor of the king? Would just her position allow her to be spared? Well, she presented herself in the inner court of the king's palace. And from the king's position on his throne, he could see anyone who entered the inner court. And he saw Esther as soon as she entered. The critical moment had arrived. Esther's life depended upon the favor of the king. We are told the king was pleased to see her, and he held out that golden scepter. Esther then approached the king and touched the top of the scepter. And now it was up to the king to ask Esther the reason she had come. He not only asked what she desired, but he told her that he would grant her desire up to half of his kingdom. That's a pretty generous offer. She could have asked for anything. I'd like that whole western front to be given to me and my people. No. I wondered about that thought because we hear that in scriptures, different places. Up to half of my kingdom. It would be maybe the magnanimous feel of the king or the leader that feels that he has everything at his disposal. And he's able to offer it to whom he will. Do you think the king expected her to ask for some great thing? Or was this just a phrase, a catchphrase that they used? What do you think?
They're fickle. Why would you do that? I mean, you're going to you're going to be a responsible king and throw it into the arms of a woman you really don't even, you could have killed her, and then you want to give her half the kingdom?
Yeah.
I don't know. I read the whole book of Esther studying this, brother, and I just think, even in the beginning, with Vashti, you just wonder about this guy's mentality. That's just me, that's all. Whether they were fickle or not, I don't know. They just seem to run on a whim sometimes.
Interesting thoughts, aren't they? Well, obviously, the king was pleased with Esther, and he was willing, he said at least, to give her anything she desired. You will notice that Esther had an urgent request to make, but she didn't just blurt it out. She didn't just pour out the whole story, did she? She set the stage. She wanted to be sure to really get the proper message to the king. So instead, she asked the king and his chief, what would you call Haman, sidekick, his first right-hand man, Haman, to come to the banquet that day. That's all she asked. Well, the king quickly consented and sent for Haman so that they could go to the banquet. And at the banquet, the king asked Esther again what her petition was. He assured her that she would be given her request up to half of the kingdom. And she then asked the king to come back tomorrow to another banquet. And I'll ask my petition then. Well, I can only imagine the suspense and the intrigue that was building in the king's mind. What does Esther want of me? To just not cast it before me, but to make all this preparation. He had to recognize that this was very, very important to Esther. And I can only imagine that he could hardly wait until the morrow when she would tell him what she wanted. What do you think? Any thoughts?
I read a book one time about Esther, and it had an idea in there that I didn't like, because the person that was writing that book seemed to make the point that Esther was procrastinating. She was putting off doing what she knew she needed to do. And I always have thought that that was part of her strategy, to
Right.
build the intrigue and the suspense and to get, one of the things that happens when you feed people, this is a kind of just a crazy idea to throw out, but eating is a calming thing for most people. And I mean, I think that was all part of her strategy. I don't think she was procrastinating. I think she was being smart or cunning or whatever.
Right? I agree with you. I think so as well. Well, there's a lot more that happened between this first banquet and the second banquet that Esther prepared. One day, and a lot transpired, didn't it? After Haman left the first banquet, he passed Mordecai, who was sitting at the king's gate. And Mordecai refused to pay homage to Haman. Haman was second in command in the kingdom, and everybody was supposed to bow to him. And Mordecai just basically ignored him. This made Haman furious. And when he went home, he told his wife and friends of all the honor that he had received, how he'd been honored by Esther, and he was the only one with the king to go to the banquet. But he also told them, all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate and ignoring me. It's not written there, but I think he was thinking that. Well, his wife suggested. She was really a good woman, wasn't she? I say that facetiously, because she suggested that Haman have a gallows built 50 cubits high, and asked the king to put Mordecai on the gallows, to execute him. And then he could go merrily with the king to the banquet the next day. Just get rid of the guy and go enjoy yourself. Wow. He didn't have a good wife at all, did he? Well, instead of being able to ask the king to have Mordecai executed, there's a lot that happened that night to the king. He couldn't sleep. And when he asked his assistants to bring the chronicles and the royal records and read to him, apparently that was to put him to sleep, he found out something, that there was a man in his kingdom that had protected his life against two of his eunuchs who had tried to kill him. This man's name was Mordecai, and apparently the king had no connection with who Mordecai was. And so he asked those who were reading, what has been done for this man to honor him for protecting the king? They said nothing. Well, the king wanted to honor Mordecai. And when Haman came in, he was prepared to ask for Mordecai's life. He was going to put him on the gallows and get rid of him. And the king says, how do I get it right? I didn't write it down. But the king asked Haman, he says, what shall be done for the person who the king desires to honor? Now just think, Haman's second command. He's the top-notch man in the kingdom. And who else would the king want to honor but me? And so he's thinking, my opportunity. He says, a royal robe that you have worn should be brought. One of the royal steeds from the royal stables with a royal crest on the steed. And that person that you desire to honor be placed on there with that royal robe, and then one of your most favored men lead him through the city and say, this is the way the king wants to honor those who he wants to honor. And Haman was all ready to climb on that horse until the king said, do exactly that for Mordecai, the man who saved my life. Can you imagine how Mordecai felt? The man he was planning to execute that very morning, he was going to lead through the city, proclaiming how wonderful he was and that he had protected the king, and he was being honored. Well, Haman was devastated, and he went home, and he poured out his troubles to his wife, and his friend said, you're in trouble. This is turned against you. Well, about that time, the officers from the palace came and said, it's time to go to the banquet. And Haman went to the banquet. And now I'm sort of confused because I've lost track of my notes. But let me just continue. Somewhere in here, they get to the banquet. And I can't remember if that was I don't think it was in the printed portion. No, it wasn't. Like I said, there's a lot happened in that 24-hour period. And when they got to the banquet, the king asked again, Esther, what is your request and what is your petition? And she told him. She said, we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male or female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. Well, the king naturally wanted to know who would dare presume to do such a thing. Esther then told the king, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. And I can imagine she pointed her finger right at him. The king left the banquet filled with wrath, and he went into the palace garden, no doubt to work through all that Esther just told him. In the meantime, Haman stood before Esther pleading for his life. He became so persistent that he fell across the couch where Esther was. And at this point, the king re-enters the banquet room and finds Haman on Esther's couch. The king then declared, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? This created an immediate response by those who protected the king. They covered Haman's face, and one of the eunuchs told the king of the gallows that Haman had built to hang Mordecai on. He also reminded the king that Mordecai was the one who spoke good on the king's behalf. And the king then ordered Haman to be hanged on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Well, let's read Esther chapter 8, verses 3 through 8, and then we'll make a few more comments. It's about time to be done. I'll read the light, and you read the dark verses. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. And said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of some fellow, Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces.
How can I receive that affliction on my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my people?
All right. So we see that Esther once again goes before the king. Again, placing her life in jeopardy. She hadn't been called. And the king again held out his golden scepter to her. She rose from her knees, and she asked the king to counteract the evil that Mordecai had done. You will notice that she gives the king proper respect. She humbles herself before him. If it pleases the king, if this is a good idea for you, you think this would work, if you think this would be good, and if you like me a little bit, she said, if I find favor in your eyes, and if this thing that I'm asking seems right to you, let it be written to revoke the laws that Haman had made. Well, Esther had presented her request by casting herself on the mercy of the king. What would the king do? Would he think enough of Esther to honor her request? He could plainly see how much this meant to her. Since Mordecai had been given Haman's position, he apparently was there when Esther pled for the lives of her people. And so the king told Esther and Mordecai to write a decree concerning the Jews. And the king gave Mordecai his royal seal and all the authority of the kingdom to send out a letter to counteract Haman's evil plans. And so the decree was written at the hand of Mordecai. And it was sent out to every kingdom, every province of his kingdom, and to all the peoples and all their languages, so that everyone would hear and understand that the Jews had the privilege and the right to protect themselves, to keep from being killed. And it was approved by the king. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. They had been delivered. And God had intervened for them. Well, there's more that we could say, but we're out of time. So the Lord bless you. Thank you for being here. Yes.
Before we're dismissed, I think the people need to know that the Hebrew word for a dice is a P-U-R. It's called a pur. And if you read in there that Haman cast pur, it means he cast dice to see what day to kill Jews. And so the Jews have a big feast in the synagogue. This is a big deal. It happens in late February, early March. It's called the Feast of Purim. That's the plural for P-U-R-I-M. And they have a big thing in the synagogue. The kids will get little statues of Haman, and they will rehang Haman in effigy. And they have a big party. This lasts for 2 days in the synagogue. But I just think that people ought to know this Feast of Purim is a big deal among Judaism every year.
And they still celebrate it.
Still celebrate it.